A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Welcome to the episode of ISNAD. And inshallah, in this episode, we're going to be talking about does Taqiyyah befit the Imam Alaihissalam. Before we begin, we just wanted to point out that there have been some recent events. There was a terrorist event that happened in Peshawar, and a lot of people passed away, and we wanted to issue our condolences for all the people and their families, and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them sabr and to inshallah make the situation of the community and the Muslims in general better, so that these kind of occurrences do not happen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help all of us and prevent these kind of atrocities from happening in the future, inshallah. So I'd like to begin by welcoming us to this episode of ISNAD. In it, we shall be discussing the accusation that has been leveled of Taqiyyah against the Imam of Ahlul Bayt Alaihissalam. And what is it? And what exactly does this Taqiyyah mean? Is it the same as is commonly understood, or is it something different? We're going to try to unravel that today. The first question that we have for our esteemed panelists, welcome all of you panelists, Jazakallah khairan, for you all to be here. It is clear from the Quran, particularly verses such as Surah 16, verse 106, Surah 3, verse 28, Surah Baqarah, second Surah, verse 195, that Taqiyyah is permissible for the ordinary average Muslim. So then the question is raised, why is it so problematic if someone claims the same for Aimma Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, who were great pious personalities, awliya Allah of the highest cadre, or even for the prophets of God, like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Why would it be problematic for them to engage in Taqiyyah, especially when it comes to the matters of deen? And is that something that's compatible with Islam or incompatible with Islam? With that question, I am going to open up the floor to whoever wants to take it first. Dr. Sayyid Ali Hur Kamanpuri, please go ahead.
Jazakallahu khairan for this very important discussion and very pointed question about Taqiyyah. So as you have clarified, the Holy Quran in verses like Surah An-Nahl chapter 16 verse 106 does make it clear that Taqiyyah is permissible for an ordinary Muslim who finds himself in a situation whereby life and limb is in danger, and so to save their life, they're allowed to do kufr or utter blasphemy as a means of securing their life, which is wajib in itself. However, to argue that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, who are paragons of excellence and virtue and the preservers and defenders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen, for them to actually deceive people or lie about matters of deen, wal-iyadhu billah, as the Ghulat tried to argue, and they invented a whole vast network of narrations to prove. This is something that goes against the vision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the Quran. It goes against the authentic statements of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wasalam themselves. It goes against the Sunnah and Seerah of the Prophet. It goes against everything that we know to be true. As far as the deen of Allah and the clear teachings of His deen are concerned, Allah is very clear that those with knowledge are not allowed to hide them. In Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse 159 and 160, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُمُونَ مَا أَنزَلْنَا مِنَ الْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالْهُدَى مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا بَيَّنَّاهُ لِلنَّاسِ فِي الْكِتَابِ أُولَٰئِكَ يَلْعَنُهُمُ اللَّهُ وَيَلْعَنُهُمُ اللَّاعِنُونَ. That indeed those who hide and conceal what we have revealed of the bayinat, the clear signs and revelations, wal huda, and guidance, min ba'di ma bayyanahu linnas, after we have made it clear for the people. See, the deen has already been made clear. You don't have to, hiding it and concealing it is basically going against Allah's vision and mission. Allah's vision was, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَكُمْ. Allah desires to produce clarity for you in the deen and in guidance. For us to say that, no, na'udhu billah, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt were doing the opposite, it's just unconscionable. And especially in light of what Allah promises and threatens in terms of punishments for people who are guilty of hiding and concealing the bayinat of Allah and the revelations and deen and ahkam of Allah. Because Allah says, أُولَٰئِكَ يَلْعَنُهُمُ اللَّهُ. These are the people on whom is the la'na of Allah, وَيَلْعَنُهُمُ اللَّاعِنُونَ. And these are the people whom those who invoke la'na, their la'na, a share of their la'na also goes upon them. And then in verse 160, Allah offers the option of tawbah. He says, yes, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ تَابُوا وَأَصْلَحُوا وَبَيَّنُوا فَأُولَٰئِكَ أَتُوبُ عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَنَا التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ. Except those who repent and do Islaah, that is they rectify, وَبَيَّنُوا, and then they clarify what they were concealing, فَأُولَٰئِكَ أَتُوبُ عَلَيْهِمْ. So such I will forgive, وَأَنَا التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ. So you can see Quranically, it goes against the vision and mission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to routinely lie and deceive people. Because remember, we are not discussing the taqiyyah of the average Muslim who finds himself, let's say, in very unfavorable circumstances. His life is under imminent, immediate threat and danger, and so he utters blasphemy. No, we're talking about the claim of some of the traditionalists that the Imams were actually lying about Aqidah, wal-'iyadhu billah, that they were giving contradictory statements, that they were actually giving wrong rulings deliberately to Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah or to mainstream Muslims because they did not trust them enough, or because they were somehow angry at them for not accepting their imamah or something of that sort.
Jazakallah khairan. That actually leads us directly into our next question. So while I want to keep the first question open for any other panelists who want to comment on it, I do want to tie that up into our second question, because what you were explaining, a lot of people are not aware of that, of this methodology. And so I wanted to point that out, that one of our classical scholars, Sheikh Tusi, he mentioned and he decried the fact that a lot of people were leaving the Shia sect due to conflicting reports of Aimma. So I want to point out for our viewers that what Dr. Sayyid Ali Hur was mentioning was in regards to how a lot of narrations, a lot of conflicting narrations are there in our books, in the Shia literature. And this had become a problem for the scholars. How do you deal with so many conflicting narrations? And so he decried that so many people were fed up of this kind of huge amount of contradictions in there. And so they started leaving the Ahlul Bayt school of thought because they couldn't see themselves being compatible with that kind of background. And in order to solve this conundrum, the scholars decided that they are going to employ the methodology of Taqiyyah because it solves this contradiction. So that leads us to another question, that were they solving this contradiction but not taking into account that this is actually going to cause more problems than it's going to fix? It's going to fix this particular problem, but then won't it create more problems? Because now they're fixing it by claiming that the Aimma Alaihissalam were actually lying in so many of these matters related to deen. And as Sayyid Ali Hur mentioned, we are not talking about the regular Taqiyyah, that a robber comes to someone's home and is telling them that, get out all your jewelry and money, and they misdirect him to another place. We're talking about matters of deen. So was this the proper way of doing it, by saying that Aimma Alaihissalam were lying and by in so many of these matters, and by that they reconcile these so many conflicting narrations? Or was there a bigger thing that got hidden when the ulama decided to go this route, and that is all the fabrication that the ghulat were doing? And by doing that, they did a great disservice, because they inadvertently ended up putting a cover over all the work that the Ghulat were doing, or a big part of the work that the Ghulat were doing by fabricating narrations against the Aima. So that it became that the gun started pointing to the Aima instead of pointing at the Ghulat where it was supposed to point. So I'd like to put that question as well to the floor and see what our esteemed panelists have to say about that. So whoever would like to take the screen, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is basically, I think what we can see on the screen is the text that you were referring to, where Sheikh al-Tusi actually talks about the presence of munafat and tabad, yani clear contradictions, which the hadith corpus is full of, to the point where he says, لا يكاد يتفق خبر إلا وبإزائه ما يضاده. You can hardly come across a narration from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt in the Shia hadith corpus, except that side by side with it, you will find a narration that completely dismantles it and contradicts it. So this is what Asid al-Ustad is then talking about when he says that the Shia scholars were faced with this conundrum. So what do? You have narrations in which the Imams of Ahlul Bayt are saying, for example, that there is no problem in praying with your hands folded. But there are other narrations in which they seem to be condemning this practice. So which one is which? And how do you explain? And how do you reconcile? So the argument that was given was, well, in the narration in which the Imam says, La ba'sa bihi, there is no problem in folding your hands in prayer. This is a kind of taqiyyah. Yani wal iyadhu billah, he was scared and so he lied, he gave the false ruling just to appease a group of the mainstream Muslims who are doing this.
Jazakallah khair. And do we have, Brother Raza, can you please proceed with your comments? Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Sayyid. So the way you lot, mashallah, have explained it consistently right now has been amazing. You see, what's important about Sheikh Tusi's statement, I'm just going to continue on from there. What's important about Sheikh Tusi's statement is that, because remember, the main thing about ISNAD is the people that know this stuff, they know it anyway. But our main aim is to let this reach the awam al-nas. They need to understand what it is that we believe in, what it is that is filled with what's filled in our books. So, because we don't unfortunately know that. We know Najib Lagha, we know etc., but we don't know exactly what we know more Bukhari Muslim than our own Al-Kafi. Do you get it? So, when it comes to this Sheikh Tusi statement, these two books in part of Kitab al-Arba that Sheikh Tusi wrote, he wrote these two books for this issue, that the issue had got so bad and there was so much tanaqud, conflicting reports within our corpus, that Sheikh Tusi wrote this muqaddimah and said that I have to write these two books because there's so many conflicting reports from the Imams. Our own Shia are leaving the madhab. They're leaving this sect saying, listen, and compare this to the awam al-nas today of the Shi'i, the mindset, where what do we get told in our majalis? What one Imam said, the other Imam said. What Imam Ali said, Imam Sadiq said. What Imam Sadiq, that's the mindset of the Shi'i. That's not 12rism. See, this is my point. If you're going to preach orthodox 12rism, then present orthodox 12rism and then see who wishes to accept it after that. This version is what Sheikh Tusi is dealing with. He's like, listen, there's so many contradictions. I have to reconcile them. How does he reconcile it? You brothers are more learned and read than me. But as a mukhtasar for the awam, how does he reconcile it? He deals with different methods. One method might be he'll say, this hadith is am, this hadith is khas. This is general, this is specific. Okay. One hadith might be, he might use rajal tools. He'll say this sanad is daif, we don't accept this sanad is sahih. No problem. These kind of reconciliation tools we have no issue with. But the tool that we have an issue with is the tool that he uses of Taqiyyah. That he'll say that when the Imam said this, like Sayyid Ali made the example of where to hold your hands in prayer. When the Imam said hold it by the side, he was giving the correct view. When he said it's fine to fold, he was doing Taqiyyah. And based on this is what basically our fuqaha then went forward with. So essentially the concept that we get told that what one Imam said, the other Imam said, this is actually nothing to do with 12rism. 12rism inherently preaches, and remember, I say 12rism in terms of what the orthodoxy is. We don't believe that. But my point is that this is what scholarship for so many years has been teaching from the time of Sheikh Tusi. So what they're saying is that when Imams are actually doing full Taqiyyah, there is no consistent, what one Imam said, the other Imam said, and that's why you should follow divine Imamah. No. It's full of Taqiyyah, full of reports that are conflicting. And the main reason they use, or one of the reasons they used to sort these out, was Taqiyyah. And this is why it's a great mess. Because like Sayyid Kampuri mentioned in the beginning, this kind of Taqiyyah in divine matters is not something that is a Quranic worldview, rather it's against it.
Jazakallah khairan. That really clarifies that what was happening here was that there was a conundrum with so much contradiction, and they were trying to solve that. And by doing that, they might have been losing the bigger picture. Jazakallah khairan. Brother Misam, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Alhamdulillah.
Yes, we can. Please.
Okay. Yeah, so just to add to what Brother Raza was saying, I think it's very important to clarify what we are talking about, because a lot of people in our community, when you discuss this topic of Taqiyyah with them, they say, yeah, of course, Taqiyyah is proven from the Quran and it's logical, and if your life is in danger, you can lie about your beliefs or you can hide them. But this is not what we are talking about right now. I think we need to differentiate between, maybe a political compromise or hiding your belief when your life is in danger at that point for a normal civilian. And on the other hand, what we are discussing is Taqiyyah in Deen for the Imams, where we claim that Imams were proactively and voluntarily lying about Islamic rulings and beliefs, assuming that giving the right ruling or belief might put their life in danger. So, for example, his life is not in danger at that point, but he's just assuming, oh, maybe if I give this ruling out publicly, or if I, for example, promote a belief publicly, my life would be in danger. So they keep lying, astaghfirullah, in their gatherings, and they keep giving out false rulings just to, save their lives. A lot of people are not aware that our books of hadith are full of this. And scholars consider any hadith that they feel is in line with the general ummah, with the Ahlul Sunnah, they consider it to be Taqiyyah. I mean, this is one of their main cards. So this is what is problematic to us. This is something that we cannot digest, because you have examples of other scholars in the ummah who stood up to these corrupt rulers and khulafa of Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas, who were, trying to arm twist them into giving false rulings. So you have the examples of Imam Ahmad, the mihna of Imam Ahmad, where the Abbasids were forcing him to adopt the Mu'tazili view of in the matter of Khalqul Quran. So he believed that his position was correct and he stood by it. He was tortured for it. He was imprisoned. He was beaten up, but he did not leave his position. You take the example of Imam Nasai. We all know that he was killed by the Nawasif because he publicly promoted the Fadail of Imam Ali, and he condemned the Banu Umayyah. You have the example of Imam Malik. He spoke the haqq, and he did not lie about the ruling of forced bay'ah to the Khalifa and forced divorce. He was beaten up for this. He was oppressed, but he did not back down. So we have examples of such scholars. We have example of Imam Abu Hanifa as well. He supported the Alawis. He supported the Zaydi movement against Banu Abbas. And he was beaten up for that. He was actually killed in prison. He died in prison. But he did not back down. So how come we have so many scholars who stood up to these corrupt rulers and they did not compromise their deen? But we are claiming that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, who are supposed to be top-notch, they compromised. They were giving out false rulings. We have so many examples. When I'm reading the hadith literature, you see, for example, the issue of the time of Maghrib, for example. You have a hadith where the Imam says that Maghrib time is when the sun disappears, and then you have other set of narrations where the Imam says no, when the sun disappears, and then you have to wait, and when there is redness in the sky, when the redness on the horizon goes away. And you have scholars saying, oh, this set of narrations where the Imam says that Maghrib time is when the disk of the sun goes down, that's the time of Maghrib. They say, oh, this is under Taqiyyah. You have so many other examples of minor fiqh rulings where scholars very easily claim that, oh, Imam is saying this because of Taqiyyah, which is something very hard to digest. It's not logical at all. So I would like to actually put a question to the panelists here. Maybe Sayyid Ali can answer it, or Sayyid Raza can answer it. Do we have examples of other people from the Ahlul Bayt, other than the Imams who we believe in, doing this kind of taqiyya? Did they also believe in it, or is this something which is only attributed to our 12 Imams?
Jazakallah khairan. Yeah, that if I might add a comment there before giving the floor to Sayyid Raza, that if you look at the examples that Brother Misam gave, then you see that so many of the mainstream Muslim scholars were making great sacrifices. And if you ask any Shia on the street, any average Shia, they're going to tell you that our Imam made the greatest sacrifice, Imam Hussein, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, Alaihissalam, in Karbala, and look at his courage and how he stood up for the truth and his sacrifice. So then we have to ask ourselves that we are facing this contradiction, that on one hand, on the popular view, we're saying that yes, the Imam are very courageous, they gave sacrifices and they stood up for the truth. But what is hidden from the public, a lot of what is going on in the seminaries is that the deen is being based on the methodology that the Aimma were actually doing Taqiyyah in deen, and a lot of stuff they said were actually lies, or if you want to sugarcoat it, Taqiyyah just for saving their life or one reason or the other. So this Taqiyyah in deen goes completely opposite of what is being preached on the popular platform, that Imam Hussein Alaihissalam was very courageous and so, and he did. But then that's a contradiction. You can't say both of them. You have to either say that they were courageous and were sacrificing, or they were doing this other thing. So how do you deal with this matter that, were both things happening? Can both things really happen? Or was it only one thing happening and the other one is a made-up thing? Brother Reza, please go ahead.
So thank you for that introduction. And Sayyid Misa, man, he was hitting some very good points where he was really drilling down on what kind of taqiyya we're dealing with, because the word taqiyya is not an issue. The concept of taqiyya is not a problem. But the application of the way taqiyya is being done and who we're attributing it to, divine personalities, and the examples he gave of certain Sunni scholars, it shows that actually people were giving their lives for this deen and what they believe in, including Imam Hussein. In a sense, they were following Imam Hussein's sunnah, those Sunni scholars. And what is our narrative saying? So I just wanted to, like Sayyid Misa mentioned about it, was that they were other alids. They were other, when I say the word alids, just for our viewers, other alids, we use the word alid, would mean other members of the Ahlul Bayt, because in the broader sense of the word, in the Shi'i 12 mind, the Ahlul Bayt are only 12 Imams. But in reality, they had brothers, they had cousins who were also ulama of the Ahlul Bayt. An example would be someone like Imam Zayd. He was from the scholars, Later Ahlul Bayt that came would be someone like Imam Qasim al-Rassi, etc. There was other alids that allied themselves more with the Zaydiyah movement. We'll talk about them in a minute. But an example would be, they were the most vicious, and I say that in a positive way, in refuting this concept. So this is an early concept that people were attributing taqiyya to the Imams. So the ghulat were attributing, and when I say ghulat, dikkas, but to be precise, in our Torah, there's going to be people that we 12ers praise by attributing taqiyya, because in Orthodox 12rism, they have no issue saying our greatest guys were in part of the taqiyya and the Imams within taqiyya. So that's fine, they can believe that. But what I'm trying to say to you is that when that was happening, the other Ahlul Bayt were condemning this. They were saying, no, the Ahlul Bayt don't do taqiyya, and there is no, especially with people that are chosen by God. So the other Ahlul Bayt were not doing taqiyya, and they were calling out the 12ers for saying, forget about us, we don't believe we're chosen by God. If you believe someone is chosen by God and then you attribute taqiyya to them, this is even worse. And an example I'll show you. This is from the Zaydi text, Al-Muhit bil Imama. It's narrated by Hassan bin Hassan, and I'm assuming Alaihissalam, this is Hassan al-Musanna, where he says taqiyya is a permission, not a virtue. Meaning it's a ruqsa, like you can do it when needed. It's not some meritorious thing that you do continuously throughout your life. Taqiyyah is when one fears for their life and is weak in the face of the cause of Allah. Virtue is rising for the cause of Allah and calling to Him. Be wary. Now look, who is he talking to? Be wary that you claim your Imam guides in secrecy and causes others to deviate in the open. This is clearly in the climate. He's addressing the orthodox tribal belief which continues till today. So you can see other members of the Ahlul Bayt saying this is deviancy. We don't believe this. By Allah, I would not be pleased if I had whatever the sun rises and sets upon, yet be the cause for a single soul to deviate. This is because I have heard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, whoever takes a life, unless as a punishment for murder or mischief in the land, it will be as if they killed all of humanity, and whoever saves a life, it will be as if they saved the whole of humanity. The repentant sorcerers in the time of Pharaoh chose death over Taqiyyah. The sorcerers in the time of Pharaoh, they chose death over Taqiyyah, and this is mentioned. And Allah praised them and sent His graceful salutations upon them, which remain until the day of recompense. Likewise, the Messenger of Allah, he sent 2 men to Musaylama. He afflicted one of them, caused him to yield to his affliction through precaution, whereas the other remained steadfast upon faith and patience until he was killed. The Prophet said, he is my neighbor in paradise, because many of the Imams of guidance openly defied the enemies of Allah. Openly defied and stood in clear opposition to them in many instances. And because Allah praised whoever does not fear the coming of death. Allah praised whoever does not fear the coming of death. And this is in contrast to the decree of Taqiyyah. This goes back to the original point, that Taqiyyah is a permission, it's not a virtue. And we have made it clear that Taqiyyah is not permitted in changing rulings. Look, Hassan bin Hassan, we have made it clear that Taqiyyah is not permitted in changing rulings or issuing rulings which are in opposition to the religion or leading to any form of deviation, as we have mentioned. This is because that what causes great corruption in religion, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised those who cause great corruption on earth with death. Therefore, how can one push death away with what is deserving of death? So as you can see, the Ahlul Bayt at that time, they were refuting this concept. This is why, as a qarina, this is a good qara'in to show you that the Ahlul Bayt members were like, hold on, our family are not doing this. They have not claimed these things you claim about them, neither do they do Taqiyyah. And like you've mentioned, Sayyid Abidi, the Taqiyyah element is not only rooted in fiqh masail, it goes all the way to divine imamah, which inshallah we'll touch on a little bit in this lecture, but we have a detailed lecture for that in the future, inshallah. But this is why in this, Hassan bin Hassan goes, you claim your imam guides in secrecy and causes others to deviate in the open. So it shows you this is not a concept that the Ahlul Bayt supported, rather it was a lie that was attributed to them, and now we've made a whole school out of it.
Jazakallah khairan. And I'd like to follow that up with, before I give the floor to Professor Sayyid Ali Hur, with 2 points that I got out of that. One is about the honor of the Ahlul Bayt, and inshallah panelists can touch on that as we move forward. That the claim that they were doing Taqiyyah is very contrary to the honor of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. And what the scholars that Brother Sayyid Raza mentioned from the Ahlul Bayt, they're showcasing their honor. And if you look at the Aima Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, they were very high on honor. Even Hazrat Muslim alayhi salam, if you read his story and the opportunities he had, and he was always taking the path of high honor. So that is completely contradictory to claiming that they would do Taqiyyah, and more so in matters of religion where it actually becomes haram. It's not a matter of just, especially for a leader, maybe not for the lay person. And I'm not saying this in terms of if someone has a life or death matter, but we're talking about preaching religion and preaching falsity in religion. That would be haram, because that is completely contradictory to what the Quran says. And maybe panelists can touch over this about the Sadiqeen. The highest level that the Quran has mentioned of people is the Sadiqeen in one sense, because the ayah of the Quran says, if I recall, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. O you believers, have fear of Allah, and of course, taqwa is the highest state, and kunu ma'as sadiqeen. And the way to preserve that fear of Allah, that taqwa, is be with the truthful, upright people who are always taking the higher road of honor. So then we have to ask ourselves, and I put this forward to the panelists, where the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam from the Sadiqeen. We say Imam Jafar as-Sadiq on one hand, and then we say that on the right hand, and then we come with the left hand and say that Imam Sadiq was, na'udhu billah, saying a lot of things which were falsities in religion, in deen, and saying that in the in the under the guise of Taqiyyah. So then we have to ask this, that isn't this contradictory? We are saying Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, he's from the Sadiqeen, and then we're saying that he's doing this. So can someone elaborate more on that contradiction? Professor Sayyid Ali Hur.
Yeah, Jazakallah. To add to what Al-Ustadh Sayyid Raza presented, there are narrations preserved in the Islamic sources that show that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam and their family, and also their extended family, we have testimonies from them exposing the Ummah to this hoax, and also exposing the Shia to this hoax. So we have this report about how Umar ibn Ali ibn al-Husayn Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam and his brother al-Husayn ibn Ali ibn al-Husayn Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, yani the two sons of Imam Zain al-Abidin, the uncles of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, they are asked this question, that هل فيكم أهل البيت إنسان مفترضة طاعته تعرفون له ذلك ومن لم يعرف له ذلك فمات ميتة جاهلية. That is this claim about you, which is which has been made popular by certain people. Is this claim true, that among you Ahlul Bayt, there is always this one individual whose obedience has been mandated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In a sense, he's appointed by God to guide the people, so that whoever does not know him dies a death of Jahiliyyah. And these are uncles of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, the sons of Al-Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam. And in this narration, they respond by saying, La wallah. They say, no, absolutely not. By Allah, ma hadha fina. We don't know of any such designation from Allah for us, the Ahlul Bayt. Man qala hadha fina fahuwa kadhab. Whoever claims this about us is a kadhab, is a serial liar. So then the person further asks Umar ibn Ali ibn al-Husayn, he says, Rahimakallah, inna hadhihi manzilatun taz'umuna annaha kanat li aliyin. And then he talks about the designation. He says, but don't you people believe that Imam Ali alayhi salam was supposed to be after the Prophet, and then Imam Ali designated Al-Hasan, and Al-Hasan designated Al-Husayn, and then Imam Zain al-Abidin designated Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, and the answer of Umar ibn Ali ibn al-Husayn is Lamata Abi Fama Awsa bi Harfain. He says, my father left this world, he did not designate anyone. We were there right in front of him. He was not there. So then where is this claim coming from? He says, Qatalahumullah wallah in haula'i illa mutaakkiluna bina. There are people who want to make money in our name. Because ultimately, that's what the ghulat were trying to argue. Where did this whole idea of imams are prophets or prophet-like entities coming from? It's coming from ghulat who wanted to appoint themselves as representatives of these imams who they wanted to make into prophets, and then tell the people that, look, they're appointed by God, and these divine appointees have appointed us. And so now you have to pay up, basically. And then he remarks, Umar ibn Ali ibn al-Husayn, he says, لَفَكَّرْتُ عَلَى فِرَاشِي طَوِيلًا أَتَعَجَّبْ مِنْ قَوْمٍ لَبَّسَ اللَّهُ عُقُولَهُمْ حَتَّى أَوْ حِينَ أَضَلَّهُمُ الْمُعَلَّى بْنُ خُنَيْسٍ. He says, I am surprised at people who can be so intellectually deficient that a person like Mu'alla ibn Khunais could fool them with his propaganda. Because on the one hand, these ghulat, they want to say that imams are divinely appointed. Well, Allah is clear about entities who are divinely appointed. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Ahzab, Surah number 33, verse 39, He says, الَّذِينَ يُبَلِّغُونَ رِسَالَاتِ اللَّهِ وَيَخْشَوْنَهُ وَلَا يَخْشَوْنَ أَحَدًا إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ حَسِيبًا. That it befits those who convey the messages of Allah, that is the messengers and the prophets, that they should fear only Allah, and they should fear none other than Allah. And Allah is sufficient to take account. So Allah is very clear. My anbiya and people that I appoint are not allowed to fear the public. If they start fearing the public and they start distorting and changing the deen of Allah and the ahkam of Allah out of their mortal fear of the public, then guess what just happened? The religion of Allah goes down the drain. And then who can be expected to clarify the truth? And that's why you find, if you look at the Quranic narrative, the prophets and messengers appointed by God, even when their life is in threat, they can never lie about their risala and their divine appointment. Look at Surah Al-A'raf, Surah number 7, verses 104 to 105. Musa alayhi salam is sent to Fir'aun, a bloodthirsty tyrant like Fir'aun. And when he goes there and he stands in front of Fir'aun, he says, وَقَالَ مُوسَى يَا فِرْعَوْنُ إِنِّي رَسُولٌ مِّن رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Musa said to Fir'aun, "O Fir'aun, listen to me. I am a messenger appointed and designated and sent by the Lord of all the universes. حَقِيقٌ عَلَى أَلَّا أَقُولَ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْحَقِّ." It befits me. It is my obligation. حَقِيقٌ عَلَيَّ. It is my obligation. I don't have a choice. أَلَّا أَقُولَ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْحَقِّ. I have to say, I cannot afford to say anything on Allah except the truth. Yani when you are sent by Allah, when you are appointed by Allah, and when you are given this mission by Allah, you have to speak the truth. قَدْ جِئْتُكُمْ بِبَيِّنَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ فَأَرْسِلْ مَعِيَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ. I've come to you with clear sign from your Lord, so send the Bani Israel with me. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He appoints and when He sends someone as a guide and as a leader, He also backs that person up. See, Musa Alaihissalam, in the beginning, he was apprehensive. He actually said to Allah, he said, قَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. He said, Ya Allah, I fear they will kill me. So it is human to have that fear. No one is saying that experiencing fear or having fear is not something that befits a man of God. No. But then acting on that fear and then going to the point where you start lying about Allah, denying your own appointment by Allah, and then changing the ahkam of deen and messing up the whole deen to the point where the whole deen gets so confused that books have to be written just to sift out. This is not the case. That's why our argument is that the reason, yes, there is contradiction in the sources. Yes, there is contradiction in the hadith. Sure. Yes, you have two sets of hadith, okay, in our sources. One set of hadith is saying that there is no problem with folding your hands in prayer. Another is condemning this practice. But what we say is that the hadith in which the Imam is saying it is not problematic is the correct one. It is his view. He is liberal about this because he can see that the Ummah has received transmissions on good faith basis saying this is how Rasulullah prayed. So when they have a good faith basis, even the mainstream Imams of the Ummah like Imam Malik, why did he not want to impose the Muwatta on the entire Ummah? He said, look, the Sunnah of Rasulullah has spread to different countries. You can't impose. Everyone will act on what has reached them. So, on issues that don't go against, that don't destroy the deen, that don't change its intrinsic structure, let there be freedom, let there be liberty. But the sectarian scholars, they looked at the narration like this and they said, no, this is creating more tolerance within the ummah. So no, we can't accept it. Not realizing that Allah has already made it clear, الَّذِينَ يُبَلِّغُونَ رِسَالَاتِ اللَّهِ وَيَخْشَوْنَهُ وَلَا يَخْشَوْنَ أَحَدًا إِلَّا اللَّهِ. People who are conveying the risalat and the messages of Allah are not allowed to fear any entity other than Allah.
SubhanAllah.
Jazakallah khairan. So this kind of points out that perhaps one of the things that was going on was there were so many difficult topics, and a lot of times people and scholars, they're uncomfortable with difficult topics and they don't want to take the high road of having to navigate all the intricacies of that. So they tend to use the hammer approach instead of using the chisel approach to painstakingly go through all of that. So the easy thing to do was to just say that if there's two differing things, we'll just say that the Imam did Taqiyyah in one. But of course, that unwittingly gives the exit and the escape route to the Ghulat, who were doing a lot of inventions in the name of the Imam Alaihissalam. It lets them off the hook, and it actually replaces them by putting the Imam Ahlul Bayt Alaihissalam on the hook. And that's really a great conundrum, because you can either think of the Imam Alaihissalam as great honorable people, Sadiqeen, people of great honor, people who uphold the path, like how Sayyid Ali mentioned. Another verse that comes to mind is the one where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet that, he said in the Quran that if the Prophet would lie, then he would take the Prophet himself and sever him. He would cut off his neck or sever him. I forget the exact words the Quran uses, but that is the level at which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects the great people of God to uphold that level, that they have to be, there's no two ways about it. They have to be exactly perfect when it comes to matters of preaching. So before I give the floor to Sayyid Raza, I just want to introduce another question, and the panelists can answer this at ease whenever they want, which is, did we end up doing something like what the Christians did when they came up with the Nicene Council, and they had Christians who were saying Jesus was fully man, which was the right way, and then they had Christians who were saying that Jesus was fully God, which is similar to what the Nusayris say, the extremist Shia. And then they took this middle path, the Christians took the middle path between the two, which was the wrong middle path, saying that he is fully man and fully God. And that became mainstream Christianity. So do we have that kind of situation where the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam, you had people saying the Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam, we are fully human, great upright people, great scholars, great honorable people, the best the Quran describes when it says the Sadiqeen, the Muttaqeen, the Mu'mineen, and so on? Or were they on the opposite side, people who were, superhuman at the same time also doing Taqiyyah? Or was it something, rather not Taqiyyah, they were superhuman people like the Nusayris say? Or is there a middle path which says that, there was a Taqiyyah element? So it might seem like that's what happened, that we took this middle path of saying that there was Taqiyyah, but what that does is it pushes away the honorable, righteous, upright school of Ahlul Bayt, just the way in the Nicene Council, all those people who said Isa Alaihissalam was fully human were pushed on the side, and they became the minority, and the mainstream became the people who say Jesus was the Son of God. Is it that something like that has happened with the school of Ahlul Bayt Alaihissalam as well? My brother Sayyid Reza, please.
Oh, mashallah, Sayyid, that was a really good analogy and the comparison that you made between two extremes. Sometimes, there's two extremes. Doesn't mean that you make a middle the way the Christians did. It clearly wasn't the correct answer. So, or the correct theology. So just now to add to that last point, was that what Sayyid Kampuri, or Ustad Sayyid Kampuri mentioned, and the mashallah, the detail he went through, essentially now where are we at now? The awam need to know, where do we stand now? We have two narratives. And the narrative, you see, the sad thing about our school is that there's been so much taqiyyah within the school that the taqiyyah hasn't just been towards the outside world, where the outside world might not know exactly what people believe, etc. It's inside the sect as well. So what do I mean by that? The awam and nas, like I mentioned about Shaykh Tusi's Muqaddimah in his books on hadith, or I mentioned about what the actual 12 narratives on taqiyyah, etc. They don't understand that actually this taqiyyah is so intrinsically linked now with our school that divine imama, like Sayyid Ali mentioned and explained why it's an anti-Quranic position, clearly goes against the Quranic worldview. It means that we have a worldview in your school that the awam and nas don't know, that imama in your school with the imams of the Ahlul Bayt is intrinsically linked to taqiyyah. Meaning when they are calling towards the imama, it is a taqiyyah movement. And the biggest qara'in and the biggest evidence for that, apart from our own sources where you can demonstrate it, is that the ummah does not recognize the imams made this claim. The ummah hasn't, ever will, historically, that the imams of Ahlul Bayt were ever making this claim. And I'm talking about specific, let me be precise. Specific claim, because I won't go towards the first three imams. Specifically after Imam Hussein, to Imam Hassan Askari, or to Imam Hassan Askari, Imam Mahdi. There's only us and the two Ismailis that have made this claim that imams are calling towards this imamah. Otherwise, the whole ummah has rejected it. And the reason why, for a 12er mindset, that's easy to reconcile is because if the ummah rejects it, it means the imams done their job. You're going to say, what are you talking about? It means the imams taqiyya was successful. Matlab, the reason why the ummah doesn't accept it is because they weren't told it. When a guy came to Imam Sadiq and Imam's like, no, I'm not an imam. The Zaydiyah came, I'm not an imam. The Sunni came, I'm not an imam. The ummah's going to say the imam never said this, you're lying. We're saying, ha, imam tricked you. Yeah, we're saying the imam tricked you. So the narrative of imamah, divine imamah, is intrinsically linked to taqiyya. So when people talk about al-Islaah and we mention the ulama abrar theory, and people say, oh, how can you say this? No one believed in this. No problem. You can say no one believed in it. You can say a minority believed in it. But I'll leave you with two lines of thoughts, two narratives. You have the traditional narrative, which has been running for as long as you want to say it's been running for. No problem. It's clearly an early belief. It's been running in the times of the early Ahlul Bayt Imams where they were condemning it from the Zaydiyah, including our own Imams, which is our narrative. That narrative is the Imams are chosen by God. That is, you have no divine appointment verses in the Quran that's explicit by Nas, but yet you have the Imams apparently claiming it and doing Taqiyyah from the Ummah and only telling their khas people. And who's the khas people? People that are in Kufa, that are not even in Medina, and then the Imam ends up cursing them as well, and that's Taqiyyah as well. That's the whole narrative. Or you have the other narrative, which is, this is a lie upon the Imams. The Imams never claimed it. It's an anti-Quranic worldview. The Ummah has rejected it, as I explained. And even the Ahlul Bayt themselves rejected it, including the Zaydiyah. So once you have those two narratives, you will understand. Choose which one. Which one do you think, like Ali Sayyid Abidi said, which one goes in line with the Quran? You say Sadiqeen, they are praiseworthy. These are traits of those who mention the haqq, who Allah chooses. So even if they were not chosen by God, people mention the truth, like Sayyid Misa mentioned about the Sunni ulama. Imam Zayd, Alaihissalam, done jihad by the sayf, by the sword, after Imam Hussein. And the funny thing is, Sayyid Ali Haidar and Sayyid Kampuri, is they mention that the reason Taqiyyah, I'll give you their response and reply to that as well. They say the reason Taqiyyah is done is because if Taqiyyah wasn't done, the deen would have not reached you in its form. I say this is the biggest lie that they told us, because the way that deen has reached us now, we are more confused about what is the Imam's actual position. So the person you're saying is chosen by God, how has now himself, astaghfirullah, caused the confusion. Allah says in the Quran about the Quran itself, but you can take it as a general rule. If it was from anyone else other than us, you would have seen kathir, conflictions, contradictions. Number one. Number two is the other alids. The Zaydiyah school is still in line today, and they Imams done jihad by the sayf. They weren't like our Imams that only focused on the deen. Their Imams actually were Imams of religion and jihad. And their fiqh and deen has reached them perfectly while doing jihad. And there was no concept of Taqiyyah. So they are the biggest evidence that this concept you made, the government didn't care if you wash or wipe your feet. The government didn't care where you put your hand. You put your hand on your side, put your hand to your stomach. The government cared about armed rebellion. Guess what? The Ahlul Bayt and the Zaydiyah Imams were doing it. But they still preached their deen. And their deen is preserved. We said all of this, and we have a mess in our corpus. So again, two narratives. You have that narrative of the traditional ones, divine imamah with Taqiyyah, or you have pious scholars that were preaching the truth and preserving the sunnah of the Prophet. The awam needs to choose, and the awam needs to know that these are your two options. So next time you think about Al-Islaah, think about it and put it forward to the scholars and say, Ya Maulana, is this our narrative? Because guess what? Most Maulanas don't know this is our narrative either. So it goes higher up the chain. And Sayyid, I'll leave the floor with Sayyid Kampuri, because as the Christian concept, Sayyid Kampuri, this is your speciality, because I can see that book as well, How Jesus Became God, you recommended it. This is your speciality. Go for it, Sayyid.
Yeah, with the permission of the moderator, I think first of all, let me show this to you. See, this what Sayyid Raza was mentioning is very true. Here you can see Shaykh al-Tusi himself admits that this is being used against Shi'ism. The argument of the Ghulat was used against the Shi'as, that وَوُجُودُ هَذَا الْإِخْتِلَافِ مِنْكُمْ مَعَ اعْتِقَادِكُمْ بُطْلَانَ ذَلِكَ دَلِيلٌ عَلَى فَسَادِ الْأَصْلِ. He says, look, if these Imams were really transmitting the deen of God, and they were always speaking the truth, then how do you have so much contradiction in your aqidah, in your fiqh? For every hadith, you have a hadith contradicting it, almost every hadith. So that's why Shaykh al-Tusi then says, وَكَثِيرٌ مِّنْهُمْ رَجَعَ عن اعتقاد الحق لما اشتبه عليه الوجه في ذلك. He says so many of the Shi'as have done ruju' from what he considers to be اعتقاد الحق, which is Shi'ism essentially. So he's saying so many Shi'as have returned from Shi'ism. They have gone and joined the mainstream ummah after they failed to reconcile. And then he says, سمعت شيخنا أبا عبد الله أيده الله يذكر أن أبا الحسين الهاروني, or in some versions, Al-Harawi, Al-Alawi, كان يعتقد الحق ويدين بالإمامة. He gives the example that his teacher, Sheikh Abu Abdullah Al-Mufid, he used to give the example of Abu al-Hussein Al-Haruni or Al-Harawi Al-Alawi. He's an Alid. He used to believe in traditional Shi'ism, but he left traditional Shi'ism After he was not able to reconcile this great contradiction that he was seeing in the ahadith, وَتَرَكَ الْمَذْهَبِ, he left the madhab. وَدَانَ بِغَيْرِهِ, he joined some other school. لَمَّا لَمْ يَتَبَيَّنْ لَهُ وُجُوهُ الْمَعَانِ فِيهَا. You see, after he was just simply not able to make sense of this deep, contradiction that existed in the madhab. And unfortunately, our argument is that it's very simple. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt were trustworthy transmitters of the Sunnah and teaching of their grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were not people to trade it for the paltry gain of dunya or to appease, evildoers in the ummah. First of all, I find the point that Ustad Sayyid Raza made very valid. The governments really did not care where you are putting your hands in prayer and what you are doing, okay? They were concerned, no government cares about these kinds of things, okay? And proof of this is that Imam Malik in Medina was openly preaching and promoting that you should not fold your hands in prayer, okay? That you should, unless maybe if it is, Qiyamul Layl, for example, he allows in Qiyamul Layl that إِذَا طَالَ الْقِيَامِ, if the Qiyam becomes too long, no problem, you can fold your hands. But generally in Fard Salah, he says, akrahu, I don't like it, but you can do it. So Imam Malik is already opening his hands in prayer. The people of Medina, who are his hujjah, they are opening their hands in prayer. But Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq Alaihissalam or Imam Musa al-Kadhim Alaihissalam, if he says that you should open your hands in prayer, what, the government is going to kill him for that? They're going to throw him in prison because he affirmed and endorsed the practice of all the people of Medina? Like, what kind of claim is this? It just does not make sense. It makes sense to say that, no. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt, yes, themselves, they used to open their hands in prayer. But in this matter, they were liberal. They did not see any harm in folding your hands, just like Imam Malik. They are ultimately also Imams of Darul Hijrah, of Medina. So, and that's why, if you permit me, I want to share with you another narration that gives us some insight. This is from Shia sources now, and it gives us insight into the tragedy that happened. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt, look, they were pro-Ummah people. They were not, people running an underground secret society or something of that sort, okay? They were transmitting the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they had received it from their impeccable chain that goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what they were transmitting was very much similar to what the rest of the ummah was also transmitting from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with minor differences in certain areas which are also known to the ummah. You see, if the Imams had always been doing Taqiyyah, how does the rest of the ummah know those areas where their opinion actually does differ from other jurists? Like, for example, triple talaq. Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they have recorded it in their books that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, it is their ijma' that triple talaq is not valid, and that it is not counted as talaq. They have recorded this in their books. Al-half bil-talaq, mut'atul hajj, hajj tamattu, permissibility of it. All of these areas where the Imams of Ahlul Bayt differed from others in the ummah, those differences were recorded in the Sunni books and also in the Shia books. So yes, where the Imams had a genuine difference of opinion with the ummah, they made it clear. They didn't hide it and reveal it only to a certain secret society. And that's how the ummah knows. The ummah is not going around telling people that, oh no, the Imams agreed with us in everything. No. Where the Imams differed, the difference was documented, it was recorded, and the dalil which the Imams of Ahlul Bayt gave was also recorded. Sayyidah Fatima salamullahi alayha, when she believed Fadak was hers, this was recorded. The dalil that she brought from the Quran, that this is mine, was also recorded. So the rest of the Imams, we believe, also proceeded on this path, whereby where they had a difference, they gave their dalil, and for the most part, they were transmitting the same deen which the rest of the ummah had received through other channels from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's why there was never any need to lie. But enter the sectarian elements, the ghulat. The ghulat did not like this unity within the ummah. They wanted to show that no, the Imams are preaching a completely different deen. Which deen? Their deen, the deen which the ghulat wanted to invent. So they invented a hadith and put them in the mouths of the Imams And through those ahadith, they made them contradict their own true teachings with which they were openly preaching and promoting in the ummah. And then later day scholars, instead of coming forward and saying, well, if we have two sets of narration, one narration is saying the Imam is saying, I have ilmul ghaib. The other is saying, no, I cannot have ilmul ghaib because the Quran says prophets don't have ilmul ghaib. So where will I get my ilmul ghaib from? The scholars, instead of saying that, look, that narration which says that Imams have ilmul ghaib is a fabrication of the ghulat, and we know it's a fabrication because it's going against the Quran and it's going against the established teaching of Ahlul Bayt and their authentic narrations. Instead of saying that, they try to reconcile it by saying, no, it's taqiyyah. So meaning when they were in the ummah, they were telling people we don't have ilmul ghaib. But in their secret society, they were whispering in the ears of their companions when no one was looking. They were telling them, yeah, people, we have ilmul ghaib. So this is the problem. And this is the issue, the tragedy, is that we took the fabrications of the ghulat against the a'immah, and we started arguing that, no, these are cases of taqiyyah. So with your permission, if I can just share with you one example, one riwayah. I know I've taken more time than I should be taking, but just this one riwayah. It's the riwayah of Abdullah bin Bakr. دخلت على أبي عبد الله عليه السلام ومعي رجلان. I hope everyone can see it. I entered into the presence of Imam Abu Abdullah Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq Alaihissalam, and I had two men in my company. فقال أحدهما, one of them said to Abu Abdullah Alaihissalam, Atil Jumu'ah. He asks Imam Sadiq Alaihissalam, should I attend Jumu'ah? Why is he even asking this? When Allah has said in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, idha nudiya lis-salati min yawmil jumu'ati fas'au ila dhikrillah. Why is he even asking the Imam Atil Jumu'ah? Because people have attributed to Imam Ja'far that he says you shouldn't go to Jumu'ah. Why? Because corrupt rulers are leading it and this and that. So Abu Abdullah alayhi salam says, I'til Jumu'ata wal jama'ata wahduril janazata wa'udil marid waqdil huquq. Yani he went with one question, the Imam gives him the answer to that question, plus 10 more, not 10 exactly, but actually additional guidance. Yeah, the Imam says, what are you worried about? I'til Jumu'ah, go for Jumu'ah and pray with the mainstream Muslims. And not only Jumu'ah, I would order you and instruct you that you should also attend Jama'ah. Allah has not only made Salatul Jumu'ah wajib, you also have Salatul Jama'ah which you should be praying with the mainstream masajid. And not only that, wahduril janaza, you should attend the funeral of the Muslims. You're not supposed to be some secret society or underground cult which isolates itself from the ummah. No, any Muslim dies in the ummah, wahduril janaza, attend the funeral. Wa'udil marid, if any Muslim is sick, go and visit him. Waqdil huquq, fulfill your duties and obligations towards the people in the ummah. He's saying this because he knows ghulat are telling the people that you only need to fulfill your obligations towards the Shia. Non-Shia, you can do whatever you like with them. Astaghfirullah. This was also Jews. They used to say, Laysa alayna fil ummiyina sabil. Those who are Gentiles, we don't need to observe the law of Moses with them. In any case, when the Imam says this, you can imagine, Sayyidi, this person has been fed with this idea that no, Imams do taqiyyah. So that's why he gives this strange look to the Imam. Yani he's not convinced. And in fact, you can feel from the text, you can feel that the Imam also realizes that because, the ghulat, they made this argument of double taqiyyah. So the Imam does taqiyyah and then he does taqiyyah about the fact that he does taqiyyah. So it's like layers upon layers of deception. So when the Imam senses this, look at what he adds. This is what I want to highlight for you. He says, أَتَخَافُونَ أَن نُضِلَّكُمْ. You see, he can see this person is not convinced. He's like, maybe the Imam is hiding, or he's telling me something that is complete opposite of what the people of Kufa are saying. People of Kufa, Ghulat, are saying, no, Imam Ja'far says you shouldn't go to Jum'ah, you shouldn't go to Jama'ah, you shouldn't visit their sick, you shouldn't. But here the Imam, now he's in front of me, he's denying all of this. So he looks perplexed and incredulous. So look at what the Imam says. He reassures him. He says, أَتَخَافُونَ أَن نُضِلَّكُمْ. Do you fear that we will misguide you? Because this is what the Ghulat are saying. That don't even trust the Imam when he speaks to you directly. He could be lying to you. And the Imam says what? You trust those Ghulat? You think we will lie to you and we will misguide you in the deen? La wallah la nudillukum. No, I swear by Allah, we would never misguide you. Brothers and sisters, this is what we believe is the true manhaj of the Imams. They do not misguide in the deen of Allah. Okay, no matter what happens. So when you see them telling you, Pray with the mainstream Muslims. Don't form a sect. Okay, don't form a secret society of your own. Be part of the ummah. Everywhere you should be seen, whether it is Salatul Janaza, Salatul Jum'ah, Salatul, any kind of, public Muslim gathering, you should be part of it. You're part of the ummah. You're not some other new deen that the ghulat want to make you out into be. We believe this is the real legacy of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. They wanted their followers to be part of the ummah. They wanted their followers to view the ummah with love and to be part and parcel of this ummah, not to be an enemy to this ummah. Wal-'iyadhu billah.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. That was really beautiful. There are so many wonderful points in there. And one of the things that I'd like to pick out of there is the definition that you put in there. And it has come all the way towards the end, but I'd like to point out that that is probably the best definition of our topic that we have today, which is the misuse taqiyyah. The best way to define it is deception. And we have to ask ourselves that, do we believe in A'immah, that we are guiding towards Allah, or are we believing in A'immah Alaihissalam, that we are employing deception? This is a question that every Shia person needs to ask themselves. It's high time that we ask ourselves that. Do we believe in Imams guiding towards Allah, or do we believe in Imams who are employing deception? And that opens us up to our last question. I know we have probably been going for about an hour, so we're going to be wrapping up. But it opens us up to our last question, which is that, was Shiaism, or the school of Ahlul Bayt, a school that was an underground movement? And I'd like to point out again, picking from what Professor Sayyid Ali Hur said, that the earliest narrations we have of the Imams, Imam Alaihissalam and Ahlul Bayt Alaihissalam, the earliest events that we see in their lives, like the event of Bibi Fatima Zahra Alaihissalam in regards to Fadak, and the mission of Imam Hussein Alaihissalam and his sacrifice in Karbala, we see that they're very upright, very honorable, and they are always sacrificing for the truth, which is completely opposite of what we're the topic today, which is deception. So we see that all those early narrations that are coming to us, the early events, one after another, is pointing the Ahlul Bayt Alaihissalam as honorable, upright, sacrificing for the truth, courageous, brave. And then you see that what were the earliest instances of an underground movement. Again, going with what Sayyid Ali Hur said, and Sayyid Raza and Sayyid Misam and all the panelists, the earliest incidents that you see of an underground movement was the movement of the Ghulat. And those Ghulat, and this is actually known and accepted by everyone, that when they were actually put under the gun and they were told, and when they were criticized that, the A'immah Alaihissalam have even cursed you about the things you're doing, what do you have to say? What did they say? They say that A'immah Alaihissalam are practicing deception, and actually they are our supporters. Whose argument was this? This was the argument of the Khattabiyyah and so many other Ghulat movements, and everyone accepts that this is what was happening. This is not a controversial matter. That was the earliest instances of the claim of deception. So now we have to ask ourselves, and this leads us to our last question, that did we inadvertently fall into that trap, and are we regurgitating the arguments of the Ghulat? That was the argument of the Ghulat, that the Imams were deceiving, and actually what our underground movement is claiming is the truth. Now are we today, mainstream Shiaism, regurgitating those same arguments, saying that Shiaism, Orthodox Shiaism, was actually an underground movement where the A'immah Alaihissalam were, na'udhu billah, deceiving people on top, and underground, this is what the true Orthodox Shiaism was, the one that was spread with the methodology of Taqiyyah, and then we accept, based on whatever methodologies the scholars have come up in later times, that this is the deen, the one that is carved out with the carving knife of Taqiyyah. Are we ready to accept that carving knife of Taqiyyah? And what implications does it have for us today? Are we saying that we are a separate group from the Ummah? We don't care about the Ummah? Because obviously, if you're going to take this to the Ummah, that's as good as a non-starter. because then you have no value. But then the argument is we don't care because we are the truth and our truth is carved out from this carving knife of Taqiyyah. Are we ready to accept that? And I'd like to give the floor to Sister Hiba Zahra, please.
Thank you, Sayyid. I think that question itself raises another question. How did that question come about? I think when we ask the question, was Shi'ism an underground movement, it feeds into the idea that Taqiyyah is an accepted part of the sect. So if we are all practicing Taqiyyah, or we all believe Taqiyyah is fundamentally part of the sect, then underground movement would have been the natural consequence of being of hiding your beliefs. So I think there's been amazing points raised, and from a logical perspective, I just want to add that if we understand that the closer one is to Allah, the more afflictions, trials, and tribulations will befall you. If we say the closest to God are the Sadiqeen, Muttaqeen, and the Waliullah, the friends of God, these are distinctions that extend to great responsibilities. So the more distinctions you have, the more responsibility you have, and the responsibilities you have are delivering the message in its truth, in its entirety, without leaving out anything that has the potential to lead somebody astray or to compromise someone's salvation in the hereafter, because that's what all of this is about. It's about where we're going in the next world. So if we accept that one of the closest to Allah after the Prophet is the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, Alaihissalam, then their level of strength, patience, and tawakkul in Allah would reflect their status. There's been examples by Imam Hussein, there's been examples about Sayyidah Fatima, and these are really important examples that shouldn't just be something we refer to when it's their martyrdoms or it's Muharram or something. These are things that should be embedded in our consciousness at all times. If we look at the Quran, which will allow us to clarify what's true and what's not, we look at the prophetic stories. One of the biggest stories that comes to mind is the story of Prophet Ibrahim Alaihissalam. He was literally thrown in a huge fire pit. People in the entire city had gathered wood in order to burn him to death. And his courage and his bravery was unfettered. It was unwavering. Even when he was thrown into the fire, he was calm about it. So we find in the Quran that Allah ordered the fire to be cool for him. So we have an example of someone, Ulul Azm Prophet, who was directly about to be killed in the most brutalist of ways publicly, and yet his Tawheed, his monotheism was unparalleled, which is why he enjoyed the status of Ulul Azm, because of his actions. It corresponded to that. It wasn't by a birth-given right or anything like that. And similarly, as Sayyid Hur and Brother Raza and Sayyid Ali Haider and Brother Misam, all the panelists have contributed amazing points, including the story of Prophet Musa, who's mentioned in the Quran the most times. And then obviously the story of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's like, if we understand that these aren't ancient stories of the past, and these ayahs are itself ayahs of Allah, they're his signs that we must ponder upon, it's our responsibility then to exert effort in understanding what our religion is, not merely confirming a bias that we were raised with. So if we then take the idea that imama is an extension of Nabuwah, then these imams must have the responsibility that these prophets had. So as Brother Raza said, there's either two options. Either you're saying that they're not divinely appointed, or you're saying that these claims are lies against them. And it is the latter, because it just doesn't make sense from a logical perspective that an extension of prophethood, i.e. imama, has to be an underground revolution, has to be something that's hidden, when their qualities and their attributes you claim to be the best after the Prophet. So you can't have your cake and you can't eat it. It's one or the other. You either say they're divinely appointed, or you say that they weren't divinely appointed, so they had to hide their beliefs, like the lay person that the Quran is referring to is able to hide their beliefs. So that's just my 2 pence about the matter, and how conveniently the Taqiyyah card is deployed whenever it suits us. And it's once you understand the Quranic message, I think it all becomes very, very clear.
Very good.
That was a very beautiful answer to that last question, and I like how you put it at the end, that how conveniently the Taqiyyah card is deployed when it suits us. And with that, I'd like to pass the buck on to back to Dr. Sayyid Ali Hur, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that it is very clear for anyone who reads the sources sincerely what exactly happened. The Ghulat have been documented to be fabricating lies against the Imams. This is what they were doing morning and evening. And all the contradictions, or majority of the contradictions, if you remove the Am and Khas, the Mujmal and Muqayyad and all of that, all of the contradictions which are authentically traced back to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they come from one very simple phenomenon, which is that one Sahih Sanad chain is actually a fabricated chain of the Ghulat. Because you see, ultimately, this is what forced some traditional scholars to consider the Taqiyyah argument, is to say that, well, this Sanad is Sahih. Yes. So if we have two Sahih Sanad and both of them are saying the exact opposite, then we have to assume that there must have been Taqiyyah. But there is another way out. And the other way out is to say, no. We already know from the testimony of Ibn al-Ghadairi that the Ghulat had a warehouse and a workshop that was raided by him, where he discovered that they had actual notebooks in which they were isolating the Sahih chains, and they were inventing, there was another notebook in which they had matan, they had prepared fabricated narrations which they were going to append and join with Sahih Sanad. Okay, so that's how you have lies, absolute lies attributed to our Imams with impeccably Sahih Sanad. Even Sayyid Sistani has admitted this. Sayyid Sistani in his Advanced Bahthul Kharij, he says the narrations about racism are perfect Sahih Sanad. Now what are you going to do? He says, but this goes against Quran and Sunnah. It goes against everything Islam stands for. So ya akhi, you want us to accept that our Imams, who are the paragons and the best manifestations of Islam, you want us to accept that they were racists? Wal-iyadhu billah? No. It's much easier to accept that the Ghulat who were lying in their name were racists, because they were not just racists. They were majma'ul al-khaba'ith. These Ghulat were really low-life scumbags. If you read the kind of filth that they promote, wal-iyadhu billah, in the name of the Imams, you will have no doubt about what kind of mindset you're dealing with. So that's why, to answer the last question that you asked, I would once again bring you back to the narration of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wassalam. Were the early Shia and followers of the Imams an underground movement or not? Let's hear from Al-Imam Abu Abdullah Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, Ya ma'ashara Shia. He's addressing the Shia. Remember, the Shia at that time were not a theological group. They were simply a political, social movement for social justice. And they supported the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So that's why the Imams recognize them as an entity, but not as a new religion. He says, look, innakum qad nusibtum ilayna. You people are associated with us. Okay, when people look at you, they think of us. Kunu lana zayna. Be a source of beauty and adornment for us. Okay, wala takunu shayna. Don't be a source of disgrace and humiliation for us. Kunu mithla ashabi aliyin alayhi salam fin nas. Be like the companions of Amirul Mu'mineen Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salam. This is a very deep statement. Go back to history and ask yourself, the companions of Ali alayhi salam, were they an underground secret society, or were they the pillars of the ummah? Ubay ibn Ka'b, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhi, the one who used to lead Taraweeh in the Khilafah of the second Khalifa, he's classified in the books of Rijal as among the Shia al-Khullas, one of the most prominent, purest of supporters of Amirul Mu'mineen. He actually even believed Imam Ali should have been Khalifa. And that's why for the first 6 months, he did not give bay'ah to the caliphs who became caliphs in place of him. So he's a hardcore Shia. And yet, is he running some underground secret society, or is he out there in Masjid al-Nabawi leading the prayer? He's the Imam of the Muslims. And he's leading them in Qiyamul Layl. This is Ubay ibn Ka'b. Similarly, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, the companion of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who is best known for the ulama abrar theory. He is, what does Najashi and what do the scholars of Rijal tell you about him? He used to be a teacher of Quran in the Jami' al-Kufa, in the grand masjid of Kufa, which was attended by all Muslims. He was freely teaching Quran to Ahlul Sunnah, to Shia, to everyone. Proto Ahlul Sunnah and Proto Shia, obviously, because at that time these madhahib were not crystallized. But the point is, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is a prominent personality within the ummah. His funeral was attended by the Muslims. Large crowd came to his funeral. Why? Because he was a follower of Imam Sadiq who gave so much benefit. He taught people Quran. He taught people the deen of Allah. He was not someone lying to them about the deen of Allah. Otherwise, they would not have attended his funeral. In the same way, Burayr ibn Khudayr al-Hamadani Habib ibn Muzahir al-Asadi, these great companions of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Why were the children of Kufa crying when they saw their heads? So these were the people who were teaching us Quran. This is not running some secret society and teaching a completely rival, parallel, new deen, which does not even resemble the deen of Allah in the Quran. So this is what Imam Sadiq Alaihissalam is saying. I'm sorry if this sounds like a khutbah, but I feel really passionately about how we have thrown the role model of our Imams under the bus. We have made them look like, wal-iyadhu billah, charlatans or fraudsters or deceivers when they were not. They were bari from this. They were people who stood upright. And the Imam is saying, look, this is my vision for you. My vision is not that you should be an underground secret society of Freemasons. Kunu mithla ashabi aliyin alayhissalam. Be like the ashab of Ali among the people. In kana ar-rajulu minhum la yakunu fil qabilati fayakunu imamahum wa mu'adhdhinahum wa sahiba amanatihim wa wada'ihim. He says a person from among the supporters of Imam Ali would be such that if he existed in a qabila, in a certain tribal area, he would be the imam of the masjid. He would be the mu'adhin of the masjid. He would be giving the adhan. He would be the one that people would entrust with their amanat and their deposits. And then the imam says, Udu mardahum, visit the sick people of the Muslims. Washhadu janaizahum, be part of their funeral prayers. Wasallu fi masajidihim, pray in their masajid. You don't need masajid of your own. Pray in the mainstream masajid. وَلَا يَسْبِقُوكُمْ إِلَى خَيْرٍ فَأَنْتُمْ وَاللَّهِ أَحَقُّ مِنْهُمْ بِهِ. No Muslim should be ahead of you in doing good, in benefiting the ummah, in benefiting humanity. He's talking about mutlaqul khair here. You know, no one should be more charitable than you. No one should be more generous than you. Whenever there is a crisis, you should be the first one to step in to help people out. You should be the most generous. You should be the most charitable. You should be the best human beings and the best specimens in the ummah. That was the vision of our Imams of Ahlul Bayt. But obviously, the Ghulat did not like it. The Ghulat had their own agenda. And to make their agenda float, they had to attack the credibility of the Imams and say that the Imams were lying, na'udhu billah, because Imams were denouncing Ghulat. Imams were cancelling their teachings. Imams were repudiating their claims. So they had to come up with a way to neutralize the claims of the Imams. And that's why I will end by reminding you that this Taqiyyah card is so dangerous. It is being revived by some of the pro-Ghulat people of today. I'm not talking about traditional scholars now. I'm talking about actual Ghulat. There are actual Ghulat on the internet who are coming forward and saying that Abu al-Khattab, Muhammad ibn Abi Zainab, the founder of the Khattabiyya Ghulati sect, was actually a distinguished companion of the sixth Imam. And the Imam trusted him with real information of the deen and imamology, that the Imam did not trust people like Zurara and others. And so that is why what Abu al-Khattab Muhammad ibn Abi Zainab said about Imam al-Sadiq was the actual truth. And what the fuqaha of the ashab who reject his narrative, they were the ones who were liars, and the Imam actually used to do taqiyyah from his own ashab like Zurara and others and not reveal the actual imamology to them because of his fear for them. Yani not only did he fear the entire ummah, he feared his own inner circle as well. The fuqaha, he feared them as well. That's why he didn't share the real imamology. And you know who is Muhammad bin Abi Zainab, Abu al-Khattab? The one who claims in our sources that when Allah says in Surah Zukhruf, وَهُوَ الَّذِي فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَهٌ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَهٌ, that Allah is the one who is the God of the heavens and the God of the earth. He says, God of heavens is Allah. We don't deny. But God of earth is the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. It is Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. This is Abu al-Khattab. And today, there is a person on the internet who is saying, yes, this Abu al-Khattab was actually representing the correct teaching of the Imam. And when you show him narrations from the Imams rejecting it, he says, that is Taqiyyah. So this Taqiyyah card is so dangerous, it can actually be used to rescue each and every single claim of ghulu, from the most brazen and shameless forms of ghulu to the lesser and more subtle forms of ghulu. But ultimately, the Taqiyyah card was invented to defend ghulu, to safeguard it and protect it, and it does not serve anyone other than the ghulat. As for the Shia school, it is a blemish and it undermines the credibility of the school of Ahlul Bayt.
I will...
please go ahead.
I will literally, I'm not going to add too much onto this because I don't even want to even add to what's it. I don't want to even ruin that taste in my mouth right now. You know, the taste is good. I don't want to ruin the taste. I'm not gonna, Sayyid Ali Hur, quick question to you. I'm just going to throw one at you. Based on this mabna and methodology that you just outlined, how can anyone, if the traditional scholars refute Abu al-Khattab on the basis and the Khattabiyyah and those ghulat movements reply with Taqiyyah, how can those people refute them if they use the same argument against us?
Exactly. You have exposed them. Yani if you're going to go down that rabbit hole, my dear, the rabbit hole of Taqiyyah, you are not going to come out of it, okay? Unless you want to play gymnastics. Because if the Imam can lie about the ahkam of deen, if he can lie in furu'ud deen, then what's to stop him from lying in usulud deen? If the Imams could lie to, Zurara, then they could also lie to, we can play the inverse card against...
Because it's Marifa. Because it's darajat, isn't it? The awam are not ready for imama, do Taqiyyah with them. The khas are ready for imama, but they're not ready for a high level of imamology. In comes Mufaddal.
Exactly.
Mufaddal's fine, but there's also another level. In comes Abu al-Khattab.
Yeah. Exactly. So basically the Imams, you are portraying them through this Taqiyyah card. You can portray them as the most mastermind fraudsters, wal-iyadhu billah, which we shudder to think could even exist. Yani you are saying that the Imams were lying to the Ummah about Imamah. Okay, they were lying to the fuqaha among their ashab about their divinity. And they were revealing the absolute truth and the only truth to only one specific group of people who are the Khattabiyyah Ghulat, who coincidentally the Imam also rained down la'na upon.
Which is Taqiyyah as well.
I mean, basically, you're going to go so deep into this rabbit hole. Like I said, you will not come out of it except without gymnastics. And brothers and sisters, there's no scope for gymnastics in deen, okay? Deen of Allah is straightforward. It is الَّذِينَ يُبَلِّغُونَ رِسَالَاتِ اللَّهِ وَلَا يَخْشَوْنَهُ وَلَا يَخْشَوْنَ أَحَدًا إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Look, if you're going to work in the field of deen, you better not fear other than Allah. Otherwise, you just resign. It is not wajib on everyone to be an imam in deen, okay? If you want to be an imam in deen, and if you want the ummah to follow you, then you need to be upright, okay? And that's the example that the Quran gives us, not just for imams, for lay people. I mean, it's so beautiful. The example of the sorcerers of Musa Alaihissalam that Sayyid Misam referred to us earlier, when Fir'aun tells them very clearly that لَأُصَلِّبَنَّكُمْ فِي جُذُوعِ النَّخْلِ. Look, if you accept the risala of Musa Alaihissalam, I am going to crucify you. Okay, I'm going to hang you on the branches of date palm trees. وَلَتَعْلَمُنَّ أَيُّنَا أَشَدُّ عَذَابًا وَأَبْقَى. I'm going to put you through the greatest of adhab. They say, قَالُوا لَن نُؤْثِرَكَ عَلَى مَا جَاءَنَا مِنَ الْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالَّذِي فَطَرَنَا. They said, we simply cannot give you preference and precedence over that which has come to us of the clear bayinat of our Lord. فَقْضِ مَا أَنْتَ قَاضٍ. You judge as you want to judge. Pass whatever sentence of punishment you want to pass against us, pass it against us. إِنَّمَا تَقْضِي هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. You cannot pass your judgment beyond the life of this world. The life of this world is temporary and transient. It will be over before we know it. Jana to Allah ke paas hai, so why not as well? Why don't we go, in a state whereby we have pleased him? Inna amanna bi rabbina liyaghfira lana khatayana wa ma akrahtana alayhi min as-si'r wallahu khairun wa abqa. We choose Allah over life with you, living a lie.
Subhanallah.
That is the example of Imam al-Hussein Alaihissalam. That is the example of his companions, the early Shia, like Zuhair ibn Qayn, when the army of Yazid tells him, where did you come from? You used to be a supporter of Uthman. Come join us. We will give you life. With Imam al-Hussein, you will only get death. And he says, Wallah, lal khuludu lal mawtu ma'ahu ahabbu ilayya min al khuludi ma'akum. He says, I swear by Allah, I would prefer to die with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein than to be given eternity with you people. So the early Shia and the Imams of those early Shia were uncompromising on the haqq. They were uncompromising on the deen of Allah. Why was Imam al-Hussein so upset? He saw the Sunnah and the Sharia being changed. That is why he said that I want to do لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. I want Islah in the ummah of my grandfather. I want to protect and safeguard the deen of my grandfather, which other forces are trying to distort and destroy. That is
so I think that's a beautiful point. I think that's the perfect point to wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for the session. And that is really the perfect point to wrap up that you mentioned, Sayyid Ali Hur, Jazakumullah khairan, that the Aimma of Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam are the mithal of that principle, of that passion, of that honor that the magicians displayed when Fir'aun questioned them, and they say that we have chosen the path of Allah and sacrificed for the path of Allah. And that's the perfect closing point. Thank you very much for giving that to us. And you also give me another point with which I would like to ask a question to the people and leave them with that question. And that question is this I got out of your beautiful lecture, Sayyid Ali Hur, which is a question that everyone who has been watching this to the end should ask themselves, that were the Aimma Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam Aimma of the Muslimin, or were they Aimma of a sect, an underground sect called the Shia, an underground movement? This is a question everyone has to ask themselves. What were they? Do we give them the high pedestal honor which they deserve, that they were Aimmatul Muslimin, or do we degrade them down to say that actually these were the leaders of an underground group by the name of the Shia? Inshallah, with that, we're going to wrap up. I'd like to thank all our esteemed panelists and everyone who has contributed. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing. Also click the bell icon and choose the all option to get notified for upcoming videos automatically.